Most people think deep sleep happens simply because they're tired. It doesn't. Deep sleep happens when your brain believes the environment is safe enough to shut down vigilance. And the hormone that largely decides that is cortisol. Cortisol is often misunderstood. People treat it like the stress hormone, but biologically it functions more like a timing hormone. Its real job is to regulate alertness across the 24-hour circadian cycle. In a healthy rhythm, cortisol spikes in the morning to wake you up and gradually declines throughout the day. By night, it should be near its lowest point. That drop is what allows the brain to enter deep sleep. When cortisol stays elevated at night, the brain interprets the environment as potentially unsafe. So, it delays deep sleep. You may fall asleep, but the brain refuses to fully power down. To understand how to lower cortisol at night, you first have to understand the deeper system controlling it. The hidden system behind cortisol. Cortisol is controlled by a three-part system called the HPA axis: hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal glands. This system constantly evaluates your environment for signals of threat or safety. When the brain perceives stress, the hypothalamus releases CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland. The pituitary then signals the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands release cortisol. This entire cascade can happen in seconds. But here's the important part. The brain does not distinguish well between physical threat and psychological stimulation. Late-night emails, overthinking, social media arguments, bright artificial light. To the HPA axis, these can all look like survival signals. So cortisol stays elevated long after the sun goes down. The circadian clock that controls cortisol. Your cortisol rhythm is synchronized by a structure in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This tiny cluster of neurons sits inside the hypothalamus and acts as the master clock of the body. It receives direct information from the eyes about light exposure. When morning light hits the retina, the clock signals the body to increase cortisol. This is called the cortisol awakening response. But the same clock must also lower cortisol at night. And that only happens when the brain receives consistent signals of darkness and safety. If those signals are inconsistent, cortisol declines more slowly, which delays deep sleep. Why deep sleep requires low cortisol? Deep sleep occurs during slow-wave sleep. In this stage, the brain produces large, synchronized delta waves. Neural activity slows dramatically. Metabolic waste is cleared from brain tissue. Growth hormone is released. Memory networks reorganize. But slow-wave sleep requires the brain to disengage from threat monitoring, and cortisol directly interferes with that process. High cortisol keeps the brain's locus coeruleus active. The locus coeruleus releases norepinephrine, which maintains alertness. As long as the system remains active, the brain cannot fully enter deep sleep. So even if you're technically asleep, your brain remains partially on guard. That leads to shallow, fragmented sleep. The three major triggers of nighttime cortisol. Most people unknowingly elevate cortisol late at night through three systems: light, cognition, and temperature. Each of these systems feeds information into the brain about whether it's safe to power down. The light signal. Light is the most powerful regulator of cortisol timing. The retina sends light information directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Bright light at night tells the brain it is still daytime. When that happens, cortisol decline slows and melatonin release is delayed. Even moderate indoor lighting can influence this process, but screens are particularly powerful because they emit concentrated blue wavelengths. These wavelengths strongly activate the circadian clock. Reducing bright light 2 hours before sleep helps the brain accelerate its nighttime cortisol decline. This isn't about perfection, it's about sending a consistent darkness signal. The cognitive signal? Your brain constantly tracks unfinished problems. When something feels unresolved, the prefrontal cortex continues running predictive simulations. This mental activity signals uncertainty, and uncertainty activates the stress system, which raises cortisol. That's why many people feel physically tired but mentally wired. The brain is still trying to solve something. Externalizing these thoughts helps close that loop. Writing down worries, plans, or next day tasks tells the brain the problem has been stored safely. The prefrontal cortex can finally disengage, and cortisol drops. The temperature signal? Your core body temperature naturally drops before sleep. This cooling process is a major signal that activates deep sleep. But if the body remains too warm, the brain interprets the environment as daytime. Cortisol decline slows, and deep sleep is delayed. Warm showers or baths can paradoxically help. Heat causes blood vessels to dilate. When you exit the shower, heat escapes rapidly from the skin. That cooling effect signals to the brain that nighttime has begun. The emotional safety signal. The brain also evaluates emotional safety before sleep. Humans evolved as deeply social organisms. Conflict, rejection, or unresolved emotional tension can keep the stress system active. The amygdala continues scanning for a potential threat, and cortisol remains elevated. This is why calming nighttime rituals are so powerful. Breathing, slow breathing, listening to calm audio. These behaviors activate the parasympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve slows the heart rate, cortisol production decreases, and the brain receives a clear message. The environment is safe. The pattern that trains your brain. Deep sleep does not depend on a single habit. It depends on patterns. Your circadian system learns through repetition. When the same signals appear every night, the brain begins predicting sleep earlier. Cortisol starts dropping sooner. Melatonin rises more consistently, and deep sleep becomes easier to access. Over time, the body begins preparing for sleep before you even reach the bed. Not because you forced it, but because the biological clock has learned the pattern. Deep sleep is not something you command. It's something your brain allows. When cortisol falls, vigilance fades, and the brain finally enters its deepest state of repair. So the real strategy for deep sleep is simple. Reduce the signals of threat. Increase the signals of safety. When your brain believes the night is safe, it will do what it evolved to do. Shut down vigilance and enter deep restorative sleep.